First up is the truly astonishing development of the collapse of the Hunter Biden plea deal in a federal court in Delaware earlier this week. In that case, you may recall, the Biden-Garland Justice Department came up with a sweetheart plea deal with Hunter Biden, and we kind of knew the general outlines of it, and it was outrageous enough. But then it was exposed more fully to the light of day under really basic questioning by the federal judge handling that case, Judge Noriega up in Delaware, and the whole thing collapsed as a corrupt plan and scheme to try to pull a fast one on the judge, the American people, and the rule of law. Now, you may recall that the Biden gang, to protect Joe, came up with a very narrow plea agreement that had Hunter Biden only admit to essentially misdemeanors related to tax filings, and the gun charge was kept out of the criminal side of the equation. The gun charge meaning he filed false information in the federal form, and that would have resulted in really nothing related to his criminal record. And what happened is Judge Noriega looked at the full plea agreement, which evidently included, this plea document, and then there's kind of a side agreement, the Exhibit A or Exhibit 1, and it's the exhibit that the judge noticed had this scheme and deal where, even though evidently there could be more crimes being prosecuted related to Hunter, he would never be prosecuted under the terms of this deal as long as he kept his nose clean, and I mean that literally. And so it was this broad grant of immunity to Hunter, and the judge said, well, hold on a second, what's going on here? Is there, for instance, the possibility of a Foreign Agents Registration Act violation here and prosecution and crime? And the Justice Department had to admit, because they had been telling Congress, oh no, this investigation is still open. Just because we have these narrow charges doesn't mean we're not looking at other things. So they had to tell the judge yes. And of course, that was not their secret deal with Hunter, because Hunter's lawyer said, hold on a second. We thought we were free and clear here. If this is the case, that this plea deal does not resolve all of Hunter's liabilities, as in any investigation that's currently known, we're done, we're out. And the deal collapsed. So it was literally one or two questions from a federal judge, and this deal was so corrupt and obviously wired in an improper way that it collapsed. And so what is going to happen next? I don't know. I do know what should happen next. Judge Garland should resign in disgrace. U.S. Attorney Weiss, who tried to pull a fast one over the court, should resign in disgrace. Every prosecutor involved in this shady operation should be forced out. And there should be a criminal investigation of the criminal investigation of Hunter Biden and presumably Joe Biden, who is also implicated in all of this. On top of that, there needs to be, and it further highlights the urgency for impeachment of Joe Biden. And not that there's always been a good faith basis to impeach Joe Biden, at least an inquiry into Joe Biden's activities. But what's happened here is that it further highlights and confirms in a dramatic fashion that the Justice Department is not trustworthy on anything related to the Biden crime family. So if there's going to be any modicum of justice done in the next year, year and a half, it's going to be through the accountability of the impeachment process, whatever you want to call it, the impeachment inquiry process. Now, Speaker McCarthy is finally taking our lead, or following our lead, Judicial Watch's lead, because as you know, we've been calling, at least I've been calling for at least an impeachment inquiry for a long time now. And even Speaker McCarthy sees, and he's been hesitant and didn't really want to do anything related to impeachment, certainly not Joe Biden, that it's almost impossible to avoid an impeachment inquiry given the level of criminality evident. And the evidence popping up either from the whistleblowers last week we talked about, that FBI 1023 form, which shows that Burisma bribed the Bidens for $10 million, or at least that's what it's alleged, and evidently other other investigations by the FBI, to the degree they existed at all, seem to confirm and corroborate what that form showed. And then we have this collapse of the plea deal. Now, this isn't any plea deal. Plea deals collapse here and again. That's true. But this is the son of the President of the United States, the center of an investigation, for instance, involving monies that went, in theory, not in theory, but the evidence shows, went to the president's family. Documents that show that Joe Biden was a beneficiary and part of the influence peddling operation, the racketeering operation that Hunter and other members of the family were engaged in, using him as the leverage point to get money for the family operation. And here we have the Justice Department caught with their hands in the cookie jar, colluding with the Biden team to try to pull a fast one on the court. And the court, of course, is, she's, my understanding of Judge Norika, she's not a shrinking violet. She's no nonsense, but she's obviously very professional. And she didn't express the anger that I probably would have if I had seen what was going on in my court. But she made it clear that the plea agreement is going to be given careful examination by her, especially given all this other information out there, which she evidently is aware of, about the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Because if you're in partnership with a foreign firm that's state-owned, it necessarily raises questions about whether you're a foreign agent. And of course, you've got that information related to Burisma that shows that Hunter was hired to essentially get Joe to keep corruption investigators off the back of Burisma. Again, foreign. How many foreign entities must you be in a relationship with before the Foreign Agent Registration Act is triggered? And of course, the Democrats, they had, for the first time, practically speaking, in American history, started enforcing it criminally against Trump world. And now they're protecting not only Hunter Biden, but I raised a question earlier today on Twitter, is, because remember, Joe was working with Hunter, the evidence shows, after he left, well, I would say as a vice president, obviously the evidence shows that, but more directly after he was vice president. And they were both in deep with the Chinese firm. Well, why didn't Joe register as a foreign agent? So, in essentially one or two questions, and the judge didn't find that Hunter Biden is a foreign agent, but given all the weight of the evidence that was before her, and what Hunter was saying about who his partners were and the money arrangements were, the judge essentially said, is what's going on about this foreign agent registration issue? And the Justice Department had to confess that it was still a live question, because to admit otherwise would be an admission of unbelievable corruption. So what we saw here was, in my view, that with the decimation of the Hunter Biden plea deal, evidence of some of the worst corruption in the Justice Department in modern American history. And it's like, well, you got to go back to Nixon's time to see how the Justice Department was corrupted similarly. But of course, that falls into the left-wing, narrative that only Richard Nixon was corrupt, and that's the only corrupt president we're allowed to talk about. When, of course, the Justice Department under Obama was a noxious nest of corruption, the likes of which we really never had seen, with the way it was used to try to jail Trump and harass Trump, how they were trying to jail and harass Obama's political enemies, through IRS tax filings run by Jack Smith, who's now trying to jail Trump. So it's just further indication that the Justice Department can't be trusted at all. Now, that being said, there still needs to be a criminal investigation, and there's no other way to do a criminal investigation of these issues outside the Justice Department, certainly at the federal level. So there needs to be a special counsel. Now, Weiss ain't it. He's not a special counsel. And there's a question about what authorities he had, and whether he and Garland have been misleading and lying to Congress about the nature of his authorities to fully prosecute these cases. But secondly, we need a special counsel to come in and at least begin to mitigate the bias and corruption that we saw on display in Delaware earlier this week. And of course, it's two sides of the same coin, the effort to protect Hunter and Joe, because by keeping this investigation narrow with the Hunter plea deal, they have the benefit of that is keeps Joe out of it. And if they have to broaden it, it implicates Joe. So that's what this is all about, protecting Joe. And the other side, as I said, of the same coin is prosecuting and abusing Trump. We just filed a lawsuit, for instance, against the Department of the Justice Department for the Hunter Biden IRS investigation documents. And this new lawsuit was filed, I guess we filed it about a week, not that long ago, less than a week or so ago. Of course, the Justice Department is withholding documents from us, and we basically wanted documents. I'm going to say basically. I'm going to tell you what documents we wanted. We wanted records and communications, including emails, email chains, email attachments, text messages, calendar invites, calendar meetings, voice recordings, charts, correspondence, briefings, letters, memoranda, reports, notes of the Office of the Attorney General or the Office of the Deputy Attorney General or any person acting on their behalf regarding the Internal Revenue Service investigation of Hunter Biden. And as I say in the release, the evidence shows that Garland's Justice Department obstructed an IRS criminal investigation implicating Joe Biden. And on top of that obstruction, Garland's Justice Department is violating the federal FOIA law to hide this information and cover up this serious scandal. Now, as I talked about last week, we have this 1023 IRS form that showed that there was serious issues that the IRS and certainly the Justice Department should have been pursuing about both Hunter and Joe. And then we had the testimony of the IRS whistleblowers last week that has been uncontroverted. And one of the whistleblowers said the Department of Justice prevented investigators from following evidence that could have led to Joe Biden, divulged sensitive information to Hunter Biden's attorneys, and allowed the clock to run out to prevent charging Hunter Biden with felonies. Excuse me, that's the judiciary characterization of the testimony. President Biden's politically appointed U.S. attorneys for D.C. and the Central District of California denied the U.S. Attorney in Delaware's request to bring charges, which at the time put Hunter Biden on the path to a sweetheart plea deal. Additionally, the IRS whistleblower's testimony confirms the Oversight Committee's findings about the Biden's family influence peddling schemes. And as I say, these agents testified, and they highlighted why the rules required a more serious investigation and prosecution than actually occurred. And I'm going to take this off. I have this on because of my tennis elbow, but it's distracting me. In the Criminal Tax Manual, Chapter 10, the testimony reads, found on the Department of Justice website, Tax Division policy states, cases involving individuals who fail to file tax returns or pay a tax but who also commit acts of evasion or obstruction should be charged as felonies to avoid inequitable treatment. In early August 2022, federal prosecutors from the Department of Justice Tax Division drafted a 99-page memorandum. The memorandum recommended approving felony and misdemeanor charges for the 2017, 2018, and 2019 tax years. If the Delaware U.S. Attorney David Weiss followed DOJ policy as he stated in his most recent letter, Hunter Biden should have been charged with a tax felony, not only the tax misdemeanor charges. We need to treat each taxpayer equally under the law. So this is why Judicial Watch is suing here, because we have information that the IRS was constrained in its investigation of Hunter and Joe. They were told there were trails that it could not pursue with Joe Biden's grandchildren, for instance, who were adults, because it looked like they were getting money. Joe Biden himself personally, and of course Hunter Biden, the Justice Department was constantly running interference. So what's the truth here? The Justice Department and the Biden gang pretends there's no there here, and that's why we're suing under FOIA. If there was no there here, why don't they just release the documents? In my experience at Judicial Watch, we find that when government agencies don't want to give us documents wholesale on a matter like this, it's because there's something they want to hide. What is the Justice Department hiding about its obstruction and interference with the IRS investigation of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? You see, they tell us repeatedly, right? The IRS is above politics. There's no interference in the way the IRS operates and how it handles tax issues related to American citizens. Well, here we have information that Biden political appointees interfered with the IRS. So this is an IRS scandal in addition to a Justice Department and a FBI and a White House scandal. The IRS has officially been compromised by the Biden administration in a way that, again, should require criminal investigations and impeachment to start. That's why we're suing. And of course, it's one of many lawsuits we have. We've got lawsuits for that 1023 FBI smoking gun document, not only for the document itself, which thankfully Chuck Grassley has largely released, but for documents about the document. What was the back and forth about the document? What was done with it? And of course, we also want records about what the FBI's involvement was in covering up for Hunter Biden. We've got a big lawsuit against the State Department about what it knew and when about Joe and Hunter's shady foreign dealings. And of course, their operations in Ukraine and elsewhere. So, I mean, Judicial Watch is really second to none. And I'm glad Congress has been taking some significant leads here and pursuing significant leads, both, in getting this information out. But as we said earlier, we need accountability in addition to hearings and information. And our Judicial Watch can get the hearing, can get information too, but we can't impeach someone. We can't prosecute someone. So Congress should be using all the tools available to them to both investigate and prosecute through impeachment these issues. And of course, where there's criminal referrals available, they can always make criminal referrals to the Justice Department, which adds added pressure. They can also change the funding structure of Congress and get some funding mechanisms in place to require the appointment of a special counsel. Also, they can defund the abusive, take away the money from folks like Jack Smith who are abusing Donald Trump in obvious political attacks, obvious election interference, obvious violations of prosecutorial misconduct, obvious selective prosecution. I mean, go back to how they treated Hillary versus how they treated Donald Trump. We saw how they treated Hillary up close because we uncovered the Clinton-Hillary emails. I mean, things were so bad over there that the FBI would only move under that corrupt Obama administration only when Judicial Watch moved. If we did something, the FBI followed up and did something too. They were actually using the FOIA documents that we uncovered about the Clinton email scandal to conduct their own investigation because they hadn't even bothered to do much. And of course, Hillary Clinton famously unknowingly deleted emails and lied about it, took classified information and lied about it, and they did nothing to prosecute her, while targeting Trump in an abusive way, even though he had every right to the documents they're pretending he had no right to. It's just an awful, awful situation for the rule of law here in the United States because our Justice Department is compromised, and I don't know if we can uncompromise it. I mean, can we get it back? I doubt it. I really doubt it. I mean, we really need to rethink the Justice Department from top to bottom in terms of funding, personnel, restrictions on their ability to operate against American citizens for political purposes, making sanctions more severe for abuses for political purposes, and of course for political prosecutions or abuses. And then, of course, the Congress right now can defund the positions of those who have been involved in this corruption. I mean, the lists are there. I mean, for instance, there's the federal court judge down in Missouri in the censorship issue. I mean, he listed the people in the Biden administration who were censoring Americans. Well, just defund all their positions. They shouldn't be working anymore. I mean, we have civil rights violations up the wazoo from the Biden White House. There's new information from Jim Jordan this week, further confirming that the White House told Facebook and pressured Facebook to censor American citizens who dared dissent from the Biden administration's views on where COVID came from and the safety and efficacy of vaccines. outrageous violations of First Amendment rights directly by the Biden White House. We know the names of the people who did it there. Why are their positions being funded? So in the end, it's not just impeachment inquiry, right? And Speaker McCarthy, you know, we shouldn't demand the minimum from our leaders, right? We should demand the maximum, always. And the maximum is defund, impeach, refer for criminal behavior, and eliminate positions, eliminate jobs, and that's kind of part of the defunding of those implicated. I mean, that's, I don't know even if that's the max. So we'll see what happens, but I can tell you that Judicial Watch, no matter what Congress does, will continue to advocate for the rule of law, because I really think our republic is tottering here. Don't you agree? I mean, the Justice Department, it might as well be, you know, Moscow on the Potomac in terms of its corrupt targeting and effort to jail its political opponents. And it's not just Trump, it's American citizens who dared to dispute the 2020 elections. We've got this obsessive, over-the-top prosecutions of Americans involved and caught up in the January 6th disturbances. And I'm not talking about someone who knocked the head of a police officer or engaged in outright violence like that. Frankly, I don't trust the Justice Department to fairly prosecute anyone. I want to be clear here. I don't agree with everything that happened on January 6th, but I don't think this Justice Department can be trusted to prosecute a jaywalking offense, let alone a politicized investigation or prosecutions that are necessarily hyper-partisan on the issues related to January 6th. I mean, we can see, you know, the rules don't apply with their prosecutions. So it's an ugly situation, and Judicial Watch continues, despite the effort by the Justice Department and the Biden administration to try to scare us and intimidate Judicial Watch by calling me, demanding documents from Judicial Watch for their sham grand jury investigation and harassment of Donald Trump. They want to scare everyone off from doing the right thing. And I'm not going to be scared off. Judicial Watch isn't going to be scared off. And I presume you won't be scared off from continuing to support our key work. Joe Biden's Justice Department had some outrageous plea deal that would have kept Hunter Biden free and clear from any prosecution for anything in a way that even a judge couldn't sign on to. I think I forgot to mention that you know, I responded initially to it, and I want to play you my initial response here. Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with the latest on the corrupt Hunter Biden plea deal. It looks like a federal judge essentially demolished the deal after she exposed through a few questions that this deal was way outside the norm, and evidently there was a secret deal between Hunter and the Garland Justice Department to give him outrageous and unprecedented immunity and special favoritism from the Justice Department. I tell you, this is an astonishing development that would, if the Justice Department were ethical, result in the immediate resignation of Attorney General Garland and every other official responsible for this corruption. And I tell you, it lends added urgency to the need for an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden and, yes, Attorney General Garland. And on top of that, we need a special counsel to investigate Biden family corruption now more than ever. I want to highlight the continued abuse of President Trump. President Trump is being prosecuted by the Biden regime, and I say regime because they've abused their powers in a way that makes them more like a regime than an administration. He's facing prosecution and jailing in Florida as a result of Biden's appointee, Jack Smith, appointed there by Garland, so Biden's responsible for him, over this sham records investigation where the president's being prosecuted for doing what a president's allowed to do under the law, which is to designate and keep records as personal, whether or not Jack Smith, Garland, or the big media disagree with him on it. And the fight now before the court, the indictment, of course, has taken place. the arraignment's taken place. So the question is, when was the trial going to be? Now, the Biden Justice Department has been desperate to get the trial set for as soon as December of this year, just a few weeks before the Iowa primaries. And as I noted to you in the weekly update last week, President Trump's legal team said, well, that's not fair. There's so much to consider here. It's a very complex case, lots of discovery, classified information issues, and the analysis of that, constitutional issues, and of course, he's a candidate for president. So today, Judge Cannon, who is appointed by President Trump, she is the U.S. District Court judge in Florida that's handling the case, who's been under tremendous pressure by the regime and its apologists, as some have called it, the regime media, because she was a Trump appointee and she was skeptical of previously during the Mar-a-Lago raid Justice Department arguments and tried to hold them accountable. So she said, no, it's not going to be in December. It's going to be May 20th, the trial, 2024, which of course still is in the middle of the election. Now, in making her ruling, she said that the Justice Department's position was would not be fair to President Trump. So it was a big slapback against the Biden Justice Department, the judge's decision. And she said, this is a complex case. Stop pretending it isn't. We're not going to have a trial. It won't be fair to President Trump to have a trial on in December of 2023. Now, instead, she said May of 2024. Now, I run hot and cold on that. I know the Trump team, I just saw before I came on air here, the Trump team was satisfied with the ruling because it gave them plenty of time to keep on fighting about this. I tend to think that it's the trial, despite her finding that the trial should begin in May of 2024, it's just not going to happen in May of 2024. I just don't see a trial of a former president of the United States, and at that time likely to be the leading candidate for president, to go forward in the middle of a presidential campaign like that. To me, that would be judicial interference in the election if Judge Cannon allowed that to happen. So I suspect this trial ultimately will be pushed past the election into the next administration, whoever runs it, and the left won't like that, but I think that would be the right thing to do, assuming that the trial goes forward at all, given the corruption involved and the lawlessness involved in the prosecution of Trump. I think there's more than enough information and evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, constitutional infirmities related to the theory of the law that's being pursued against Trump. And, so we'll see what happens here because all these issues are going to be litigated before May, and the idea that it's all going to be resolved one way or another before May, I think is I don't think going to be the case. Now, if the trial does take place in May, I mean, what a nightmare that will be for the Republic, because to me, it will just make a mockery of our system of justice, make a mockery of our election, our right to govern ourselves. Should the Justice Department, run by Biden appointees, engage in a novel application of the law to try to jail his political opponent in the months before an election? I mean, how is that not election rigging? And if Biden had any spine, as I said before, and had a modicum of ethics, he doesn't even need to issue a pardon. He'd tell the Justice Department, we're not doing this, okay? This is too disruptive to America. You're walking on thin ice with respect to the law here. It's making a fool of us abroad. But we now know, based on other information, that that's not going to be the case, because the Justice Department, according to reports this week, leaked to the New York Times, that this Jack Smith plans to indict Trump again, plans to arrest Trump again. President Trump announced last week, or I guess earlier this week, that he received notice from the Justice Department inviting him to testify to the grand jury within 4 days, the grand jury that's still going on up here in Washington, D.C. What it's looking into, who knows? But generally, according to the leaks, obviously, it looks like to me, from the Justice Department to their friends at the New York Times, they're thinking of prosecuting Trump and likely to prosecute Trump for daring to oppose President Biden's election, both as a president and as a candidate, both of which were within his rights as president under the Constitution and within his rights as a citizen candidate under the First Amendment and other federal and constitutional laws. And this was my reaction that I issued on Twitter, and I think it's worth highlighting it specifically. Let me read it here for you. You can see it up there. You see, the nice thing about paying a little extra money for Twitter is you get to write long pieces like that. And believe it or not, the longer pieces get some attention. You can see 1.2 million people reviewed this tweet. Breaking: Biden, who is the most corrupt president since he was vice president, trying to criminalize criticism of how he was elected with an unprecedented indictment of Trump. According to leak to the Allied New York Times, his operative, Jack Smith, threatens Trump with unprecedented and unconstitutional criminal charges for Trump's daring to exercise his duties as president to ensure federal election law is followed and for daring to exercise his God-given First Amendment rights as a candidate to dispute a controversial election. Of course, by arresting and seeking to jail Trump, Biden is trying to rig yet another election in order to maintain and obtain additional power for him and his Democratic Party. All this is un-American, anti-constitutional, and would be a fundamental violation of the civil rights of President Trump. The latest plan to arrest Trump again is obviously designed to send a signal to Americans: accept rigged elections without complaint or be jailed. Frankly, the abuse of Trump by the Biden administration should be the subject of civil, criminal, and impeachment investigations, and #tyranny. And I talk about this a little bit at a speech. I don't think we can call it up now, before the Freedom Fest group down in Memphis, Tennessee. I know this is all about politics because I testified to the grand jury, as I told you, for up here in Washington, D.C. It was back in February. And it was hours and hours of being harassed on this election dispute, all of which is protected by the First Amendment and appropriate under federal constitutional law and, depending on the states, state laws. And that's all Trump was doing. That's all other citizens were doing. But, it's not just about Trump, because the Attorney General of Michigan, who's a Democrat partisan, announced that he's indicting and trying to jail for the rest of their lives 8 or so citizens of Michigan who are involved in the Republican Party or as volunteers or friends of leaders. Basically, I think at least one of them is over 80. And they signed on to be an alternative slate of electors. And they're trying to jail them for doing that, even though it's the sort of conduct that goes on election after presidential election, most notably in Hawaii in 1960, when there was an alternative slate of electors put forward to compete with the official ones in the presidential election involving John F. Kennedy. But Republicans do it, they're going to get jailed. So this is a dangerous time. I keep on saying it, but I'm going to keep on saying it because there's urgency here, my fellow patriots. Our republic is under attack from the Biden administration. They are misusing the powers of government to try to jail their political opponents. Their Democratic Party allies in other jurisdictions, both in Michigan, New York City, Alvin Bragg, and we're also hearing this week they're planning to indict Trump in the Democrat-controlled county, Fulton County, Georgia, for his daring to question the mess of an election in Georgia in 2020. And so they're going to be targeting Trump there. So this is a search and destroy mission against the Republican Party by the Democratic Party machinery. And they're utilizing the precious powers and awesome powers. I don't mean awesome in the sense that, oh, they're great, they're wonderful. I mean awesome in the sense that they can destroy you if they're used against you. The awesome powers of the federal government the federal prosecutorial power and state criminal prosecution power to try to jail people, not because they committed crimes, but because they were on the wrong side of a political fight. And this is another way, again, to rig the election in 2024. And it's designed to not only scare people off from questioning if the election outcome is suspicious or the process is suspicious, but even from participating in the election. Because the new rule is if you exercise your First Amendment rights, you will go to jail. That's the new rule under Biden. You will go to jail. They will censor you. And in the case of Trump, as I say here, they're planning to arrest him and jail him for exercising fundamental First Amendment rights. And now I will remind you, the First Amendment protects several rights. As I say, it's a God-given, these are God-given rights you have. The First Amendment recognizes those rights you naturally have as a human being, these blessings from God that we have as a result of our special humanity. You have the free exercise clause, right? The free speech clause, the free association clause, which is part of this, right? To collaborate with an association of a campaign or political party, and the right to petition your government, to go to your government and say, this election was bad, what can we do about it? Let's change and protect let's be sure that the correct result is reached as a result of either Congress taking appropriate steps or the states taking appropriate steps. They want to outright outlaw those constitutional First Amendment rights that citizens like Trump have and these poor citizens in Michigan have. And Michigan's not going to be the end of it. Democrats in Arizona are thinking of ways to jail folks who disputed the election there. It's happening in Georgia, and I'm pretty sure it's happening in other jurisdictions as well. So this corruption, this effort to jail their political opponents, it's spreading throughout the nation, right? It's like the equivalent of the smoke from those socialist fires up in Canada. This corruption of and abuse of power designed to thwart their political opposition and jail them. And I tell you, it's by the time this is all over, we're going to look more like Moscow than Washington, D.C. in terms of our political life. That's what I fear. So if I were in Congress, I'd be doing everything possible under the law to stop this. If I were, for instance, the governor of Georgia, I'd do everything I could under the law to stop this. And of course, the Justice Department, in my view, the Justice Department's attack on Trump should be subject, as I say, to civil, criminal, and impeachment investigations. It's that bad. Why do I think it's that bad? Because we're seeing what it is they're nervous about when they go after Trump. What is it they're trying to distract us from? Which is their own criminal behavior, or strong evidence of their own criminal behavior in protecting Biden. You have also Congress, there's not a dollar that falls from the sky that isn't approved by Congress, certainly for Justice Department investigations. So if they object to the way the Justice Department is investigating Trump and trying to jail him and trying to abuse his civil rights, then why are they funding it? They can defund Jack Smith's investigation. They can stop government money for the illicit prosecutions of Trump. Again, it's going to be more than one, right? They can defund monies, federal monies, for jurisdictions like Michigan, jurisdictions in Georgia, jurisdictions in New York, who are abusing their powers to target Trump and other innocent American citizens. And it doesn't have to mean, they're not necessarily going to shut down prosecutions, but they can say, if you're violating civil rights of citizens, there are going to be restrictions on federal funding for your jurisdictions. We're not giving you money that you can spend on somewhere else, so you can spend elsewhere to abuse citizens under the United States Constitution, who have, exercised their rights under the United States Constitution, their civil rights. So there are all sorts of things that Congress can do. And I tell you, if you're concerned about the future of the Republic, I implore you to ask your member of Congress what they're doing about it. You can call the House at 202-225-3121 and ask for your House member. That's the Capitol switchboard. The same goes for your senator. Ask your senator, where's your leadership on this issue? There are Republican candidates running around Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, all over the place. Ask them, where's their leadership on this issue? You know, the challenge, I think, for Republican candidates who, I understand there's a primary race. They don't, if you're, Trump is in a primary, there are candidates against him, and they're going to be critical of him. I understand it. That's politics. But it would seem to me that any citizen running for office, and I hold the standard for Democrats and Republicans, should denounce this. And that seems to me the test for those who don't want Trump to be the primary, the nominee for the party is, look, I don't want, you say, I don't want Trump to be the nominee for the primary if that's the position of someone like Chris Christie or Tim Scott or Ron DeSantis. But I tell you what, I don't want the Justice Department to abuse the rule of law. And if they continue to do so, this is the reaction they will get from me. And they should be denouncing it. I mean, the test is that are you going to sit by while your political enemies are abused by the Justice Department? I hope that's not the case for Republicans, but it kind of is the case for too many of them. And it's a lot of reasons. It's a lot of the reason you hear some silence from Washington, D.C., from some Republican leaders because they like to see Trump harassed and abused. And and if it meant abusing you, they wouldn't care either. I remember during the years of the tax Lois Lerner's years, by the way, Jack Smith, who was working with Lois Lerner to target American citizens. There are more than a few Republicans who like the idea of the Tea Party populists who are critical of Republican leadership being suppressed by the IRS. And that's why there wasn't much done to go after Lois Lerner. So our Republic is under assault. I keep on saying it. Judicial Watch is doing its part to expose what's going on. We have litigation. We stand true and fast for the rule of law and our Constitution. As I said, we've been harassed by the Jack Smith team because we are effective, because we've been telling the truth about the corrupt targeting of Trump. I was brought in, Judicial Watch was harassed with a document subpoena. I was brought in to have to testify in retaliation, I believe, for telling the truth about the abuse of Trump. So Judicial Watch is going to stand strong, and the question is, will other citizens stand strong too? In the least, call your senators, call your congressmen. Tell your neighbors. Tell your friends that there's a real problem in Washington, and it's not a joke what's happening to Trump. Because when they're done with Trump, as you see in Michigan, they're going after the Michigan equivalent of the little old lady from Pasadena to try to jail her for the rest of her life for daring to dispute the Biden election. I don't know what the Michigan equivalent of Pasadena is. Maybe you could tell me below. But you all know what I mean. So I'm outraged. I'm upset about it. And I'm not going to give Republicans a pass for doing nothing. Hearings are great. This was an important week for disclosures. Senator Grassley deserves a medal for a lot of reasons. His willingness to release this document, he deserves credit for. Congressman Comer, his hearing here, the IRS witnesses was great. And of course, Jim Jordan continues to do some good work. But hearings are not what they're put on earth for. It's to get things done, to get accountability, and to use all the tools available to them under the Constitution. For instance, there's going to be a government funding fight towards the end of the year, I guarantee you. And what happens is they're supposed to spend all this money, and they spend it through an omnibus, and either they do it or the government, quote, shut down. Never really shuts down. Parts of it gets shut down. Are they willing to shut down the government to protect Trump from being jailed? Protect you from being censored? You pick the topic. If not, why not? Is there anything important enough? Is our republic important enough to shut the government down for a few weeks to stop the Justice Department from abusing the core rights under our Constitution, the civil rights of Trump and other citizens? I think so. So those are my thoughts. And of course, you know, Judicial Watch will continue using the Freedom of Information Act through requests, federal lawsuits, and dare I say it, education. I go on social media, Judicial Watch goes on social media, we talk about these issues, and the left goes ballistic because we tell the truth in a way they don't like. And as I said, it's not just the left that goes ballistic. Jack Smith goes ballistic because they're sending FBI agents to my home. Actually, that was done by the Biden Justice Department. He just doubled down by forcing me to go before the grand jury, even though he didn't need me to do that. So things are not going to get better, guys. They're going to get worse. They're going to get worse. I'm warning you, it's going to get worse. Our republic is on the brink. We've had many lawsuits on this abuse of Trump, not only with the Russiagate abuses, but the more recent abuses under this Mar-a-Lago scheme that the Biden regime concocted in order to jail Trump and arrest him. And so we've had many lawsuits, much obstruction, but we just keep on smashing through the stone walls through the federal FOIA process. And accordingly, we received 477 pages. It may seem like a lot, but it really wasn't because a lot of it was duplicative. And they're interesting documents that show the National Security Division leadership of the Justice Department discussing the political implications of Trump allowing CNN to use closed-circuit TV footage, CCTV, of the raid on his Mar-a-Lago home. We received the records, and they also confirmed, that the Justice Department had asked that they turn the video off, and thankfully Trump's people didn't. Judicial Watch obtained the documents in response to a September 2022 Freedom of Information Act lawsuit filed after the Justice Department failed to follow the law. See, we can't raid the Justice Department when they break the law. See, that's kind of the one of the outrages here. Not that I want to raid the Justice Department, but you know what I mean. They break the law virtually with impunity in ways that no one else would be able to. After they failed to respond to our request for records about the raid. And this is what we found. In an August 17th, 2022 email exchange with the subject CNN Mar-a-Lago CCTV footage, a trial attorney with the Justice Department's Counterintelligence and Export Control section of the National Security Division, whose name is redacted, so a senior official, but they're just blacking out the name because that's what they can do, writes to colleagues, I just received a call from our case agents at FBI, and apparently the Bureau has been given a heads up by CNN that CNN has CCTV closed-circuit television footage from Mar-a-Lago, presumably of agents executing the search that they may air as soon as tonight. And then something's redacted. And redacted means they black it out, and when they redact documents, it means they're saying to Judicial Watch, and ultimately they have to say to the court when it proceeds, that this is information that we have a right to withhold under law pursuant to certain exemptions, such as privacy, law enforcement, national security, and exemptions such as that. Jay Bratt, B-R-A-T-T, who's the Obama appointee at the Justice Department largely responsible for this abuse of Trump, he's chief of the Counterintelligence and Export Control section, comments, CNN is saying F. POTUS, the former president, so former president of the United States, is still weighing whether to release the footage. Another advisor adds, got a call from Evan, which is likely then Trump attorney Evan Cochran, and Jay says Trump team is still weighing the release. Per Evan, some say it will energize base, others say not a good look for F. POTUS to have it out there. CNN is working on a story that Jay requested Trump team to turn off the cameras and they refused. So Jay Pratt was the brat who asked the Trump people to turn off the videos. Justice Department official George Toscas, who, by the way, was heavily involved in the effort to destroy Trump under the Russia hoax, he's also involved in this outrageous abuse under the documents hoax. We're watching to hear back from FBI headquarters on their recommended approach. Bratt writes, "We did. This was with the call. This was in the call, and I had with Evan Cochran before the search. It's standard for blank." So a lot of this is redacted. And then they say, "We also plan to communicate to CNN that law enforcement safety need to blur agent faces if footage ends up being released." Well, I don't think that's necessarily right. I hope CNN, if it ever comes out, they don't blur faces. I don't see why FBI agents who work for the government should be immune from having their faces shown when they raid someone's home. I mean, isn't it interesting? You know, imagine if a local police department was involved in a raid on a home and people were worried about the civil rights being violated. Do you think we wouldn't know who did the raid? We wouldn't know the names of the police officers? Of course we would. But the FBI raids the home of President Trump. We can't find out who the names are. They want to black out or blur out their faces. And on top of that, as I said before, we're seeking the names of those who are prosecuting Trump. Literally, for the first time in American history, prosecuting a former president. This Justice Department, Jack Smith, who has a record of being trying to jail opponents of the Democratic Party. Remember his involvement with Lois Lerner and the IRS, trying to jail the groups that Lois Lerner was, the heads of the groups that Lois Lerner was abusing with delayed responses to their requests to have their groups approved by the IRS and abusive questioning and such. They're telling us we can't get the names of the people working for Smith. Now, a few of those names will pop up as a result of these proceedings, but I want to know who else is working for him. Matt Gaetz, by the way, of Congress, has followed up and is demanding information as well because he wants to do something about curtailing funding for the entities, it looks like, that are abusing Trump. So all of this secrecy, I mean, the same Justice Department that harasses the police all the time refuses to tell us who's involved in harassing Trump and other Americans. Well, we're in court over it. And we're not going to be intimidated to stand aside. I want to point out I'm wearing the Judicial Watch t-shirt, or at least one of our shirts. They're all available. This and other fine merchandise is available on our Judicial Watch website or store. It's shopjw.org, shopjw.org. It's a great way to support Judicial Watch. You buy something from the store, and a portion of that purchase goes to support Judicial Watch. And so you can see our mark up here and in the back. I don't know, it's a little bit small, but you can see we have our motto. Our motto is because no one is above the law. I guess it's our motivation too, because too often here in Washington, D.C., we act as if there are a lot of people above the law, and that shouldn't be the case. And certainly our Republican form of government depends on that ideal, and that's why Judicial Watch has adopted it as its motto. So if you like this shirt, or you want mugs and keychains, you know, the type of typical merchandise a group like Judicial Watch would have, we've got a lot of great stuff there too. We got polos and sweatshirts and hats. We got great hats. There's a nice red JW one there I think you can go and purchase. So I encourage you to support Judicial Watch that way. You know, the left isn't going to give us money from the government, so you have to support us, dear citizens. So anything you're able to do, not only obviously you can make a purchase at Shop JW, but also you can just make a donation outright to Judicial Watch because no one is doing as much to uncover government corruption in the face of significant pushback from the government, as Judicial Watch is.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.